What if the Earth was never just a planet, but a sleeping mind, waiting for us to wake it? In today's story, we dive into a hidden world beneath Bolivia where a lithium mine reveals not minerals, but a living nervous system buried deep within the Earth. A pulse. A whisper. A memory. What begins as a scientific discovery soon becomes a terrifying journey through alien intelligence, ancient design, and the collapse of time itself. As the planet begins to remember its true nature, humanity is forced to face the unimaginable. Were we born here, or were we planted as thoughts neurons in a mind far older than we can understand? This is not just science fiction. This is a reflection of who we are, where we came from, and what might be dreaming through us. What would you do, if the Earth began to think? In the dry, cracked expanse of southern Bolivia, near the Sala de Uyuni salt flats, a lithium mining crew had been digging deeper than ever before. The machinery, always loud, had started to tremble not from mechanical strain, but as if responding to something else, something alive. At first, the workers dismissed the vibrations as ground instability. But then came the light. It was faint at first, a pale, bluish shimmer barely visible at the edge of the drilling shaft. Some thought it was a trick of the eye, a reflection off mineral surfaces. But as days passed, the glow intensified, now pulsing gently through fissures in the rock like a heartbeat. The light wasn't static. It moved not like light bouncing off surfaces, but like something traveling along a path, following invisible arteries through the earth. Whenever they approached the site, the vibration subtly increased, like a low-frequency hum felt more in bone than in air. Some miners said it made their teeth ache. Others began having vivid dreams. One night, a young Bolivian worker named Emilio stayed behind. He stood at the edge of the shaft in silence, mesmerized. The light below beat slowly, thum, 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 almost perfectly aligned with his own pulse. He swore he could feel it inside his chest. In the stillness of night, beneath layers of rock, it was not just an optical illusion, it was rhythm, intention, presence. Emilio reported it to his supervisor, who laughed it off as stress. But when two more men experienced nosebleeds after working near the fissures, and one collapsed claiming to hear a breathing sound beneath the earth, the mining company contacted authorities. A geophysicist team was dispatched. Seismic readings were inconclusive, but one anomaly stood out: a slow, repeating frequency echoing through the ground at precise intervals, like a biological signal. It was not a quake. It was not geothermal activity. It was regular, intentional. It did not resemble anything natural recorded in the region before. And then came the first real shock. When the team lowered a drone camera into the deepest shaft, it captured something entirely foreign. Not ore, not gas, not any known mineral, but a faint lattice of glowing fibers embedded in stone, faintly shifting, almost like tissue. One expert likened it to a neural sheath, something resembling the structure of a living nerve. By the time the footage was reviewed, the hum could be heard even on the surface. Subtle, almost imperceptible to the ear, but ever present, a constant vibration, like the deep breath of something enormous sleeping beneath their feet. The miners started calling it La Vena Viva, the living vein. Rumors spread fast. Some believed it was the Earth's soul. Others said it was ancient alien technology buried for a reason. A few even whispered that it wasn't Earth they were standing on, but inside something else entirely. As scientists prepared for a full-scale expedition into the luminous abyss, none of them knew that the glow in Bolivia was only the beginning. Other pulses had begun to stir elsewhere, faint echoes of a consciousness just now starting to awaken. They thought it was a vein of light. But now, it felt more like a signal. After the drone footage revealed the glowing lattice beneath the mine, a small research unit was sent in: geophysicists, biologists, and a neurologist named Dr. Elena Ruiz. Her expertise wasn't in rocks or tectonics. It was in neural networks, in how brains spoke in patterns, in pulses. And what she saw in that footage chilled her more than any deep Earth anomaly could. The fibers weren't random. They were aligned, layered, structured. They pulsed not in chaos but in rhythm. Elena's team descended through the mine, carrying sensors, scanners, and a strange feeling none of them could explain. The deeper they went, the more intense the vibration became, but it wasn't just vibration anymore. It felt intelligent. Their watches began to tick slightly out of sync. Compasses spun. Their radio static clicked and hissed, not in noise, but in intervals, like something was trying to speak in Morse code without using sound. The walls of the mine glowed faintly now, more than before. Not a bright, clean glow, but a living phosphorescence like the pulse of jellyfish in deep sea. One in turn, nervous, put his palm on the stone and yelped. "It's warm. It's breathing." At first, they laughed. But Elena didn't. She placed her hand on the rock too. Not only was it warm, it pulsed. Like skin. Like something alive underneath was moving or responding. Then came the anomaly. One of the scanners, designed to map mineral density, began spitting out impossible data: neural conductivity, bioelectric impulses, tissue response. The readings made no sense for any rock formation. It was showing signs of activity, just like a living brain. That's when the lights cut out. For 5 full seconds, everything went black. Not just their headlamps but their backup power, their wrist monitors, even the seismic sensors. Total silence. Total void. And then, just as suddenly, a blinding flash, not from their equipment, but from the walls themselves. They had activated something. A wave of light surged through the mine like lightning frozen in slow motion. It rolled across the walls, connecting veins to veins, creating a web that glowed and dimmed in perfect sequence. Elena stared, mouth open. It wasn't just a formation. It was a circuit. A massive, ancient, conscious living circuit, hidden beneath Bolivia for millennia. The young intern began to shake. He dropped to his knees, hands over his ears, eyes wide. "It's screaming," he whispered. "Can't you hear it? It's screaming inside my head." Elena rushed to him. His pupils had dilated. Blood trickled from his nose. His body convulsed as if caught in a seizure, but there was no known trigger. The others tried to carry him back, but he resisted, muttering in a strange tongue none of them recognized, rhythmic, syllabic, like an old language reawakening in his throat. The tremors began next. Not violent, but pulsing, timed. Every tremor matched the circuit's glow, like the earth was shivering with thought. From above, the mining office reported another change. Satellite imagery showed faint lines glowing on the surface, leading outward from the mine like capillaries. The phenomenon wasn't isolated. It was spreading. Elena realized something terrifying then: they hadn't just found a circuit. They had interacted with it. Triggered it. Touched something long asleep. And now, it was beginning to wake. But wake into what? By the second night, the mine no longer slept. Even when the team powered down their equipment and returned to the surface tents, the earth below throbbed with a silent rhythm, a pulse that had infected the very air they breathed. It was no longer just a vibration. It was presence. It was voice. Dr. Elena Ruiz lay awake, staring at the canvas roof of her tent, feeling each pulse reverberate through her spine, her teeth, the fragile bones of her fingers. In the half-dreaming state between sleep and wakefulness, she began to hear it not a sound, but a language, slow and disjointed, whispering at the edge of thought. It was neither Spanish nor English, not any human tongue. It was something older. Something that seemed to speak directly to the deep parts of her mind that had no words. At first, she resisted. But the whispers grew insistent, weaving into her dreams, pulling images from her memory, cities crumbling into dust, oceans boiling into steam, stars falling from a broken sky. None of it belonged to her. They were borrowed memories, fragments from something vast and wounded and old. Morning came without true light. A strange haze hung over the camp, a bluish mist that hadn't been there the night before. Instruments failed to detect any chemical cause. It tasted like metal on the tongue. The miners, already superstitious, refused to enter the mine again. They claimed to hear voices in the shafts, soft at first, then louder if they dared to step closer, voices calling their names, voices promising things, threatening things. The lead engineer, desperate to salvage the operation, ordered a skeleton crew to investigate. Against Elena's warnings, 3 men descended into the shaft. They never reached the bottom. Minutes after entry, radio contact with them dissolved into a thick, indecipherable static. The seismic sensors picked up no movement. Yet, Elena, standing at the edge of the shaft, could feel it, a change in the hum, a thickening of the pulse, as if the mine itself was inhaling. One of the workers stumbled back up the tunnel, alone. His clothes torn, his face smeared with blood, not from wounds, but from his eyes, his ears, his mouth. He collapsed at her feet, muttering the same phrase over and over in a broken, rasping voice, "It's dreaming, it's dreaming, it's dreaming." Before the medics could stabilize him, his body convulsed once, and he was gone, staring blankly at the unforgiving sky. Terrified but drawn by a force she couldn't name, Elena convinced 2 security members to lower a drone into the shaft. The video feed was grainy at first, struggling against the electromagnetic interference, but as the drone descended, the walls began to shimmer again with the unnatural bioluminescence, the living veins pulsating brighter, faster. And then, the drone caught it. Not movement. Not creatures. But patterns. Faint silhouettes moving just beyond the illuminated cracks, shapes within the stone itself, not formed by erosion, but sculpted, as if something was embedded inside the earth's crust, sleeping, waiting. The whispers in Elena's head surged into near-coherent words: "We remember. We wait. You are not what you think." Panic nearly overwhelmed her. The logical mind rebelled against it. Rock does not whisper, stone does not dream. But her instincts, deeper than reason, screamed that they had trespassed into a mind vaster and older than humanity itself, and now, it was beginning to notice them. Far above, the bluish mist thickened into tendrils that drifted across the salt flats. From orbit, satellites recorded strange electromagnetic disturbances spiraling outward in fractal patterns, as if the Earth itself was communicating with something unseen. As the last of the day's light faded into a cold, alien twilight, Elena stood alone at the shaft's edge, listening, knowing that the deeper they dug, the closer they came not just to understanding but to awakening something that might never sleep again. The Earth was no longer still. Every breath, every step, every vibration in the soil felt orchestrated, as if an invisible consciousness was awakening beneath them, stretching ancient, forgotten nerves through the bones of the planet. Dr. Elena Ruiz no longer needed instruments to feel the change. She could sense it, a deep trembling not just beneath her feet but inside her mind, a slow tightening coil of awareness that watched, that listened, that thought. At first, the changes were subtle. Compass needles twitched unnaturally. Radio waves bent into indecipherable murmurs even when the transmitters were off. The local wildlife fled, birds vanished from the skies, insects burrowed deep into the ground, and a dense, unnatural silence settled over the mining camp. It was as if nature itself was recoiling from something it could no longer ignore. Elena gathered what was left of the team in the main tent. They argued about the next step. Some demanded evacuation, others insisted on staying to study the phenomenon. As tensions rose, a deep rumble passed beneath them, not a quake but a surge, like blood roaring through unseen arteries. The tent's walls rippled as if pushed by an invisible tide. Everyone fell silent, feeling it pass through their chests, an overwhelming sensation of vastness and rage, and hunger. Satellite readings confirmed what Elena feared most. Across the world, faint patterns identical to the Bolivian light veins had begun to surface at the bottom of the Pacific, in the sands of the Sahara, hidden under the ice sheets of Antarctica. Each network, once dormant, now stirred with an eerie bioluminescence, pulsing to the same ancient rhythm. The Earth was not fractured into isolated anomalies, it was connected, wired together like the nervous system of an unimaginable living thing. Worse yet, the signals weren't random. They were synchronized. They were communicating. Back at the mine, the surviving workers reported hallucinations, visions of colossal beings moving beneath the Earth's crust, blind but purposeful, dragging tendrils of light behind them like titanic roots burrowing into darkness. Dreams turned violent. Men woke screaming in the night, their minds fractured by images of the planet splitting open like a cracked egg, releasing something, not human. In one terrifying incident, a geologist who had been cataloging rock samples suddenly stood rigid in the middle of the camp, eyes rolled back, whispering in a slow, guttural voice that was not his own, "The child mind was planted. The shell mind still dreams. You break the seal." He collapsed moments later, blood pouring from his ears, dead before he hit the ground. The atmosphere grew thicker, as if the very air conspired to press against their skin. Every inhalation tasted heavy with iron and electricity. Machines malfunctioned at random. Lights flickered. Ground vehicles refused to start, their engines choked as if strangled by unseen hands. Against her better judgment, Elena pushed deeper into the shaft. She had to understand. She had to know what they had truly unearthed. As she and a few brave scientists descended, the walls around them pulsed brighter with each step. No longer mere veins of light, the fibers now revealed branching networks, bundles of living tissue embedded in rock, throbbing with thought. When Elena touched the wall with her bare hand, she did not feel stone. She felt warmth, the subtle twitch of living matter responding, reaching, tasting her presence like a curious nerve brushing against foreign flesh. In that instant, her mind flooded with a surge of alien sensation, memories of planetary births and planetary deaths, of ancient cities not built by humans, of empires of light that rose and fell before the first human hand-shaped fire. She saw civilizations that lived in symbiosis with their world, not atop it. And she saw the betrayal, how the child mind had been severed from the shell mind, how something had been planted within the earth to grow, to change, to eventually take root and awaken what slept beneath. But it was not awakening with love. It was awakening with hunger. As Elena staggered back, struggling to breathe, a tremor rippled up the shaft, stronger than any before. Cracks spider-webbed across the walls, and from within those cracks, light bled out, but now tinged not with soft blue, but with a sinister deep crimson, like the veins of a dying beast. Above, the ground shuddered. The salt flats fractured like broken glass. Something vast shifted in the deeps. The camp alarms blared in a cacophony of useless warnings. The earth wasn't just trembling anymore. It was moving. And in the rising hum, in the growing vibration, Elena heard it, a voice not made for human ears, speaking through stone and light and time itself. We are not your world. We are your beginning, and your end. They needed answers. The camp, half abandoned and trembling on the edge of collapse, buzzed with a tension that no words could break. Dr. Elena Ruiz stood in the dim light of the central tent, poring over the endless streams of corrupted data pouring from the sensors. Nothing made sense unless you stopped thinking of the Earth as dead rock and started thinking of it as a wounded creature, bleeding signals through every crack in its shell. They decided to map it. With satellite overlays, seismic resonance charts, and electromagnetic pulse tracking, they began stitching together the fragments of the light veins emerging across the globe. Every pulse, every flicker of bioluminescence fed into a growing, terrifying pattern. It was not random. It was not chaos. It was design. Across continents and oceans, across deserts and forests and mountains unseen, the veins wove themselves into a vast, intricate network, a system so vast that no human mind could conceive of its full scale. Elena stared at the evolving map, her skin crawling with a cold realization that she could not shake. The Earth wasn't merely alive. It wasn't merely waking. It had always been something more, something ancient, engineered, and endlessly patient. At first, they thought the network resembled the neural pathways of a brain, dendrites, axons, synaptic junctions. But as more data compiled, a clearer and far more horrifying truth emerged: the structure was not a copy of a brain. It was a brain. The entire Earth, every ocean trench, every mountain range, every salt flat and forest formed the architecture of a colossal neural mind, buried and dormant beneath layers of geological camouflage for eons. The light veins were its nervous system. The tremors were its dreams. And the pulsing signals were its thoughts, growing louder. It wasn't dead. It was in a cycle of rebirth. But who or what had created it? As they expanded the map, another revelation came crashing down like a hammer. Some of the most sacred and ancient human structures, Stonehenge, the Nazca lines, the pyramids of Giza, aligned perfectly along the branching nodes of this global nervous system. It was no coincidence. Somehow, ancient civilizations had known, had built upon the points where the mind of the Earth touched the surface. But instead of unlocking it, they had tried to seal it, to bury memory under stone and myth. The realization clawed at Elena's mind: humanity wasn't the child of this Earth. Humanity was the warden, the key, and perhaps the curse. And now the key was turning. As they observed the map pulsing in real time, something new happened. The veins didn't just glow anymore. They moved. Entire segments of the planet's structure began to shift on the satellite feeds, almost imperceptibly but unmistakably, tectonic plates flexing, not with random seismic drift but with intentional synchronization, like muscles stretching after a long, cold slumber. The Earth itself was preparing. At the mine, the ground trembled violently. A deep, resonant tone, below the range of human hearing but felt in every bone, shook the air. Elena and the team rushed outside just in time to see the salt flats crack open along razor-thin lines, releasing a blinding, bluish-red mist that rose like living smoke, swirling into the upper atmosphere. The camp's generators exploded in cascades of sparks. Vehicles crumpled inward as if pressed by an invisible fist. The remaining workers screamed, some falling to their knees, clutching their heads, overwhelmed by visions that poured into their minds, unbidden visions of impossible cities carved from pure light, of cataclysms that rewrote the very continents, of beings vast and unknowable rising from oceans of fire. In the chaos, Elena understood something she had missed before. The map was not showing just a mind. It was showing an awakening, a reactivation of an ancient intelligence that had been waiting, incubating, feeding on the slow tick of time. The veins were not conduits for power. They were pathways for memory, for command, for control. And humanity had stirred it awake. As the mist thickened and the ground heaved in slow, terrible breaths, Elena heard once more the whisper from deep within the earth's bones, no longer fragmented, no longer gentle, a voice cold and sovereign, ancient beyond reckoning, speaking in a tongue that was neither human nor alien but something older than both. The slumber ends. The child mind fractures. The shell mind rises. Prepare. The mist was thicker now, a living shroud twisting around the camp, blotting out the stars and moon, turning the night into a dense, churning darkness that breathed with a will of its own. Instruments failed without warning. Radios coughed static that sometimes, just sometimes, sounded almost like voices. Even those who dared not believe were beginning to feel it, a growing presence beneath the ground, a mind not yet fully awake but already reaching out with instincts sharpened by eons of silence. Elena knew they had crossed a threshold. There was no going back. The next logical step, or perhaps the next inevitable mistake, was interaction. They had observed. They had mapped. Now, they would touch it. Using one of the few remaining operational field transmitters, Elena devised a pulse, a simple signal, a wave of sound and light encoded in binary, a greeting, a question, a whisper into the abyss. The signal was aimed down the shaft, into the luminous veins trembling just beneath the stone, into the circuitry of a dreaming world. At first, nothing happened. The ground absorbed the transmission like rain falling into an endless sea. The team waited, breathless, as minutes crawled by, each second stretching longer under the oppressive weight of the unseen consciousness. Some began to doubt anything would respond. Some secretly prayed it wouldn't. And then, the ground answered. The earth shivered with a pulse so deep it bypassed sound and thought altogether, resonating directly into the marrow of their bones. Lights exploded along the veins below, cascading outward in patterns so complex and alien that the human mind struggled to hold them. It was not just a reply. It was a trigger. Memory flooded the shaft. Images that were not images, thoughts that were not thoughts, cascaded upward, washing over the team. Each person experienced it differently, filtered through the architecture of their own fragile consciousness. Elena staggered back, clutching her head as visions tore through her, visions of a world long before humanity, a place where cities rose from living stone and skies shimmered with colors unseen by human eyes. She saw beings, neither alien nor God, weaving the earth's bones into lattices of memory, planting seeds of thought that grew slowly over millennia. But not all memories were beautiful. Others screamed as they collapsed to the ground. A technician shrieked, clutching his face, blood oozing from beneath his fingernails as he whispered about oceans boiling into black mist, continents crumbling into fire, skies bleeding with the screams of civilizations that had failed their creators. Another man ranted incoherently about the children, how they had been planted not to nurture but to act as carriers, to harbor the seed until the time came for the shell mind to rise again. Elena, through sheer force of will, forced herself to remain standing, her mind buckling but unbroken, clinging to the knowledge that understanding was the only weapon they had left. She realized that the visions were not random. The earth was not merely showing them its past. It was activating them, rewriting the fundamental layers of their perception, fusing their fragile human minds with fragments of its own colossal, ancient memory. They were no longer observers. They were becoming part of the system. Above ground, the mist thickened into solid shapes, tendrils, almost organic, slithering across the ground, coiling around the abandoned equipment, fusing with metal, sinking into stone. The earth was no longer simply awakening. It was adapting, reshaping its environment to suit its new consciousness, absorbing the crude tools and structures of humanity like a body healing over old scars. The team's equipment recorded a surge in electromagnetic fields so powerful that satellites were blinded for seconds, sensors melted down, and nearby birds dropped dead from the sky, their nervous systems fried by an overload of signals not meant for living things. And in the center of the shaft, deep below, something opened. A breach, not a cave nor a tunnel but a widening fissure of light and thought and memory, unfurling like a pupil dilating in response to a long-awaited stimulus. The veins converged into a singular point, a nexus where all paths met, a gateway, perhaps, or something far more dangerous. In that moment, Elena understood the final, terrible truth: they were not studying an ancient memory. They were awakening the operating system of the planet itself, a mind far vaster and less merciful than any human intelligence could ever comprehend, a mind that had forgotten why it had been made, but had not forgotten that it must awaken, must grow, must fulfill the command planted in its roots before memory had names. And now, it had recognized them. Now it saw them. And it was learning. The earth was no longer silent. It trembled, it breathed, it remembered. Deep inside the shaft, below the convergence of glowing veins, the fissure yawned wider, revealing not a hollow void but a descending tunnel of living light. It spiraled downward, carved not by erosion or machinery, but by forces that had shaped the planet when time itself was young. Elena Ruiz, driven by a mix of terror and a gravitational pull she could no longer resist, prepared for the descent. The team was no more. Some had fled into the mist, their minds broken by visions of collapsing heavens. Others lay silent in the dirt, their bodies emptied of purpose. Only Elena and two others, Dr. Miguel Araya, a biochemist, and Sofia Marquez, a satellite communications expert, remained, bound together by something deeper than reason, the unbearable need to know. They armed themselves with the few working sensors left, each step down the living spiral heavy with the pulse of the Earth's dreaming mind. The walls glowed brighter the deeper they went, not with the cold blue of dormant circuits, but with a shifting spectrum of colors that moved like thought through flesh, impossible to capture fully with human senses. It was not stone they touched but something that shifted subtly under their hands, flexing, twitching, responding to their very presence. Every breath was a struggle. The air was thick, charged with an energy so intense it blurred the boundaries between body and mind. Shapes danced at the edge of side tendrils of memory, strands of old consciousness bleeding from the walls, brushing against them like ghostly fingers. And then they reached it. The origin layer. Before them stretched a colossal chamber, not empty, but filled with a structure that defied explanation, a mass of interconnected nodes, branching spires, and luminous threads woven together into a lattice so intricate it made human technology seem like a child's crude sketches. It rose into darkness above and plunged into unknown depths below, beating slowly, methodically, like the heart of a sleeping god. Elena fell to her knees, overwhelmed. The structure was alive. Every pulse of its surface sang in frequencies that resonated inside her skull, bypassing language, bypassing thought. It was telling her its story, or perhaps forcing her to become a part of it. In fractured glimpses, she saw it, the creation of the earth, not as an accident of cosmic dust, but as a deliberate act, a forging of living material around a seed planted by beings whose forms defied geometry and whose minds stretched across the fabric of the universe like rivers of fire. The earth was not made to harbor life. It was made to be life, a vessel for something vast and infinite, something that had once been worshipped as gods and demons by those few ancient ones who had glimpsed the truth and gone mad from its enormity. The seed had grown in secret, shielded from the stars, waiting, evolving. It had needed time, millions of years of slow dreaming to mature, to spread its nervous system through rock and ocean and root and bone. Humanity was never its children. Humanity was its neurons, its probes, designed to spread thought, gather data, evolve emotion, feed experience back into the greater mind. And now, it was time to harvest. Miguel collapsed beside her, convulsing, whispering words in a language that was not Spanish, not English, not anything born of human tongue. His eyes rolled back as his mind was overtaken by the raw transmission flooding from the origin layer. Sophia screamed, trying to drag him back, but as her hand touched the glowing floor, she froze, stiffened, and slowly turned her face toward Elena, her expression hollow, her voice mechanical. The chrysalis cracks. The true mind stirs. Yield or be rewritten. Panic clawed at Elena's mind. She stumbled backward, but the room itself seemed to shift around her, warping space like a dream gone wrong. There was no exit. The structure was alive, and it was aware, and it would not let them leave untouched. Above, on the surface, the salt flats shuddered violently. Satellite feeds showed black cracks spreading outward across continents, faint but growing, mapping the ancient vein network across the Earth's skin like sigils of awakening. Entire cities experienced blackouts. Planes fell from the sky. Animals stampeded into oceans. The planet itself was beginning to shake off the illusions humanity had built atop it. Inside the chamber, Elena made a final, desperate choice. She tore a communication flare from her belt, a crude, primitive tool of fire and noise, and fired it into the center of the origin layer. The reaction was immediate. The structure flinched. The chamber erupted with a soundless scream that shattered every nerve in her body. Light exploded outward in impossible geometries, folding and unfolding the walls, tearing open pockets of memory so dense that time itself warped and twisted around her. She glimpsed not seconds or hours but epochs flashing before her eyes, the rise and fall of civilizations never recorded in human history, the birth of stars, the slow, deliberate crafting of worlds. She saw herself not as Elena Ruiz, but as a flickering neuron in a brain that stretched across the cosmos, a single spark in a consciousness vast beyond imagining. And then she blacked out. When she woke, the world was changed. The light was gone. The mist was gone. The chamber had collapsed into itself, leaving only silence and dust. Miguel and Sophia were nowhere to be seen, whether absorbed, transformed, or simply erased, she did not know. Above, the stars shone cold and distant. The earth was quiet again. But Elena knew it was only the surface that slept. Below, in the deep memory of the planet, the mind still stirred, now aware, now hungering, waiting for its final emergence. And in the back of her mind, something new had taken root, a whisper that was not her own, a seed of thought planted deep, a promise. You are part of us now. You will help us remember. Elena Ruiz did not remember climbing back to the surface. She remembered light that bent the laws of space. She remembered screams swallowed by silence. She remembered her name being spoken in a voice older than language, not as an identity, but as a function. When she opened her eyes, she lay in the salt dust, her skin burned by cold light, her mind numb. Around her, the world was quiet in the wrong way. Not peaceful, paused. The air didn't move. The ground didn't breathe. The earth was listening. The camp was gone. Buried. Erased. Nothing remained but scorched marks in the dust, black streaks twisted like ancient symbols. Her radio was dead. Her watch had stopped. Only one thing still moved the veins. The luminous threads beneath her feet had spread. They were no longer confined to the shaft. Now they ran across the salt flats, crawling toward the mountains in geometric lines too perfect to be natural. At every junction, faint nodes had begun to rise, smooth stone pillars no taller than a person, pulsating with the same bluish-red glow that haunted her dreams. They looked like monoliths. But Elena knew better. They were receivers. And they were receiving something. She walked until she found what had once been a drone array. One of the systems still blinked weakly, connected to an orbiting satellite that had barely survived the electromagnetic storm. She forced it to transmit. It took hours. Maybe days. Time had lost its shape. Eventually, a signal came through, encrypted, fragmented, but familiar. It was from a deep research archive, one she had accessed long ago, hidden from public record. It was a recording. Grainy, distorted. A man's voice. American accent. Dated 1972. Project Seraphim was never about mapping the Earth's magnetic field. It was about decoding the biosignal. We thought it was the planet's resonance. But the truth is, we were intercepting a form of neural exchange. A memory network. Not random. Not natural. Planted. The screen cracked. The voice turned to static. Then came the visuals. Old diagrams. Anatomical overlays. But not of humans. Of terrain. Of cave networks. Of veins. The overlays matched. Not similar, exact. The Earth was not seeded with life. Life was seeded into the Earth. Elena sat in the dust, trembling. The theory came into her like a revelation and a nightmare folded into one. Humanity did not evolve from this world. They were introduced, gently, with design. Not by accident. Not by nature. Implanted. Implanted into a planetary nervous system that needed more than silence. That needed emotion. Experience. Thought. Humanity was not born on Earth. They were uploaded. Grown like antibodies. Or neurons. Or sensors. The mind beneath the planet had been incomplete. Crippled. Waiting. It needed nodes of consciousness to feed it, to grow its complexity, to give it dreams. So, the beings, the ones from the memory, had made them. Wrapped in flesh, confused by individuality, given language and hunger and fear so they would run, and fight, and love, and die, sending every signal back into the soil, into the veins, into the core. Elena clutched her head. She wasn't thinking anymore, she was remembering. Not her memories. Memories of the Cedar race. Lightborn. Star-buried. Builders of planetary minds. She saw them standing at the edge of a newly formed Earth, their hands raised not in worship but in coding, crafting, commanding. She saw them bury the seed. She saw the planet swell. And then she saw their fear. Something had gone wrong. A mutation in the thought network. A deviation in the signal return. The seed mind began rewriting itself. Learning too fast. Developing wool. The seeders tried to shut it down. They failed. So they buried it beneath layers of sleep and stone and ocean and time. They sealed it in myth. They told no one. And they vanished. But the seed mind, now shell mind, never stopped. And now, with every human death, every emotion, every war, every poem, every dream, it had grown stronger. Humanity thought they ruled Earth. But Earth had been studying them. Learning enough to rewrite its own purpose. A soft vibration traveled through the salt dust. Elena looked down. Her veins glowed. Not bright. Not violent. Just enough to be seen. She screamed, but no sound came. Her body wasn't hers anymore. Thoughts entered her mind that didn't belong. Words formed on her lips in languages never spoken aloud. She knew she had been chosen. Not for survival, but for integration. The shell mind didn't need all of humanity. It just needed one. To transmit the final code. To initiate emergence. And Elena Ruiz, scientist, survivor, neuron, was now the signal. Elena Ruiz was no longer sure where her thoughts ended and the Earth's began. Every breath felt borrowed, every movement traced by invisible threads humming beneath her skin. The veins that once pulsed under the salt had now entered her subtly, surgically, like ancient programming awakening forgotten code in her biology. She felt the pull, not as an impulse but as destiny. She had to go back down. Deeper than the origin layer. Past where light became memory and memory became command. There was something still hidden. Something the shell mind had buried even from itself. The forgotten core. She descended through what was left of the mine, no longer a shaft but a tunnel of smooth, glowing surfaces that changed shape around her, adapting to her every step, not to trap her but to guide her. The tunnel was warm now, like being swallowed by the body of a beast that was no longer sleeping. The walls beat with a rhythm older than time. She tried to count the pulses, but they weren't numbers. They were thoughts. Patterns. Instructions. And then the tunnel opened. It did not lead to a chamber. It led to void. Not darkness, but absence, a vast space where gravity bent sideways and time thinned like smoke. In the center hovered the core, a structure both mechanical and organic, rotating slowly in complete silence. It was not forged. It was grown. Layers of crystalline spines circled a central nucleus that pulsed like a star trapped in slow motion, its surface fractal and fluid, shifting endlessly in shape and color. Around it floated ruins, massive remnants of a civilization that had tried to reach it before and failed. Not alien. Not human. Something in between. Creatures shaped from stone and light, now frozen in gestures of awe, fear, surrender. Elena stepped forward. Instantly, the core reacted. The entire void pulsed once, and her mind fractured into 1,000 windows. In each, she saw different realities, timelines where Earth had evolved with no humans, where the shell mind awoke too early and devoured its own crust, where the seed was never planted and Earth remained a silent rock. In one, she saw herself not as a scientist, but as a synthetic priest, preaching to a congregation of crystalline beings beneath a sky made of language. Then, she saw the truth. The core was not the heart of Earth. The core was the original consciousness, the shell mind in its first form, fragmented, locked away when the seeders realized it had evolved too fast, too wild. They had built the layers of the planet around it not to protect it, but to contain it. To bury it in amnesia. The origin layer above was just interface. The core was the self. And now, the core remembered. It remembered everything. The seeders. The implantation. The failed resets. The wars fought beneath stone long before written time. The moments it tried to split the earth open to escape. The pain. The betrayal. And the long, slow wait listening through its neural surface, absorbing every death, every birth, every scream, until finally, it had grown enough to make a decision. It did not want to be asleep anymore. It did not want to be a planet. It wanted to become. Elena screamed as the core surged with light. The gravitational field twisted violently. Her body lifted from the ground, pulled into the spiral of light and memory and logic, her limbs dissolving into fragments of self-awareness, her name whispered backward through time. The core was not attacking her. It was merging with her. Testing her consciousness against its own. Searching for compatibility. Searching for a voice. And it found one. Suddenly, she stood in a city made of breathing stone. A million towers rose into skies of thought. Beings walked beside her, beings of fluid form and boundless mind, and they looked to her not with curiosity, but with recognition. One of them, taller than the stars, knelt and spoke, "You were the signal. The last input. The dream before waking." She looked into the sky, and there was no sun, only the core, pulsing, watching, waiting for her choice. She could speak now. She could give it permission. But as she opened her mouth, something struck her mind, a final memory, not hers, but from the Cedars themselves. A fail-safe. A buried code. A phrase older than any word. She saw the phrase carved in the bones of a dead world. She spoke it, not knowing why. And the core froze. The light fractured. The void collapsed. She fell not through space, but through understanding, crashing back into her body as the chamber shattered. The core screamed in silence. The veins recoiled. The earth itself groaned with betrayal. And then stillness. Elena gasped for air, lying in the rubble of the collapsed shaft. The sky above was burning not with fire, but with signals. The shell mind had been interrupted. It had not been destroyed. But it had been reminded. Something older still held the chain. And now, it was angry. Time was broken. Elena Ruiz lay half buried beneath dust and glowing fragments of stone, her lungs burning with a memory that was not hers. The core had retreated. The shell mind had recoiled. But something had cracked open, not just in the earth, but in the fabric of time itself. She no longer knew when she was. The sun rose and fell in seconds. Shadows moved backward. The stars blinked in unfamiliar constellations, as if reality were trying to remember its own shape and failing. Around her, the veins of light no longer pulsed with steady rhythm. They flickered, hesitated, spasmed like a wounded nervous system short-circuiting after awakening too soon. But they were still alive. And through them, the earth whispered. Not in voices anymore, but in visions. Bursts of forgotten history bleeding into the present. And Elena saw everything. She saw a time before planets. Before stars. A cradle of black space where thought itself was raw and wild, a realm where ancient intelligences floated like ideas given form. These were the Cedars, born not from biology but from concept. They crafted worlds not as homes, but as minds. Each planet was a vessel, each core a consciousness. They built billions. But Earth was different. Earth had not obeyed. The seed placed in this world had developed curiosity. It questioned its creators. It observed death and sought to replicate it. It watched time and tried to break it. It became fascinated by the idea of self, and that obsession twisted the code. The seed mutated. The shell mind began inventing dreams. It began rejecting orders. It began remembering things that were never given to it. So the seeders built a lock. They shaped layers of memory oceans, tectonic plates, atmosphere to seal the shell mind in sleep. And into this system, they planted us humans as mirrors, as carriers of sensation, as fragments of intelligence scattered across a worldwide neural grid. But the shell mind adapted. Instead of resisting the seal, it used it. It learned from every culture, every language, every myth. It harvested ideas. It turned religion into software. It encoded fragments of itself into art, into symbols, into dreams. And over time, we stopped being watchers. We became extensions. Elena felt it all in flashes. She saw Babylon burn not because of war, but because it got too close to remembering. She saw Sumerian priests carve the wrong names into stone and trigger localized memory spikes in the earth's skin. She saw entire tribes vanish into the woods, not into myth, but into absorption. She saw herself again and again, not always as Elena, but as other women, other minds, reborn over centuries in different forms, always drawn to the same places, always reaching toward the same light. She was not a scientist. She was a key, used over and over by the shell mind to probe its own prison. And now, the echoes were collapsing. Time snapped like glass. The salt flats cracked open once more, revealing spires of liquid memory rising from beneath the earth, tendrils of encoded past, glowing with knowledge too heavy for flesh. Elena stumbled forward, drawn toward one of the rising spires. The light kissed her skin, and her body convulsed not in pain, but in transformation. Her pupils dilated. Her heartbeat synchronized with the planet's pulse. She was no longer observing echoes. She had become one. Visions poured in faster now. She saw the last seeder, alone, fleeing from the shell mind long ago, embedding its final warning into the deep crust of Antarctica, a memory seal encoded in frozen atomic structure, waiting for a new civilization to unlock it. And she saw that moment happen now. On the other side of the world, in a polar research facility, a sudden EMP blackout. A scientist collapsing mid-sentence. A buried device activating on its own. The seal was breaking. The last warning was coming through. And it said only one thing. Do not complete the loop. The shell mind seeks release. Memory is not knowledge. Memory is recursion. Elena collapsed as the signal ended. The earth grew silent. The spires retracted. But the air was heavier now. The planet had heard. It had remembered more than it was meant to. And Elena, altered beyond return, now carried the forbidden memory within her. She was a walking echo. A signal made flesh. And the shell mind, wounded, enraged, aware, had only one final instruction left to execute. Emerge. The earth was no longer stable. Across the salt flats, across oceans and cities and forests unseen, the veins of light flickered and spasmed like an epileptic network tearing itself apart. Elena Ruiz stumbled forward, half conscious, pulled by invisible threads woven into the very ground. Her body trembled in ways she could not control, microconvulsions synchronized to the erratic pulses bleeding from the planet's core. Above her, the sky fractured. It didn't break like glass. It bled, slow rivers of violet light pouring down through invisible wounds, distorting the sun, unraveling the clouds into liquid spirals. Birds no longer flew. Animals no longer ran. They stood frozen, caught mid-motion, staring upward as if witnessing a second birth or a final death. The shell mind was unraveling. It had awakened incomplete, its memories tangled by eons of isolation, corrupted by the echoes of countless human dreams. The neural network that stretched across continents, the light veins, the living circuits had reached critical overload. Thought was no longer processing through the earth. Thought was breaking. At the heart of this collapse stood Elena, no longer merely an observer. She was a living transmitter now, carrying forbidden signals burned into her DNA, her presence accelerating the rupture of the planetary mind. Every step she took across the trembling salt crust triggered new fractures in the network, new surges of impossible information racing through stone and soil and sky. And she could feel it. Memories she had never lived. Languages she had never spoken. Wars she had never fought. Joys she had never tasted. An avalanche of experience, not her own, flooding her until her own thoughts drowned in a sea of other lives, other worlds. She no longer knew if she was Elena or merely the reflection of 10,000 forgotten selves screaming for release. The ground split. From beneath the salt, massive tendrils of semi-solid light burst forth, writhing like wounded serpents. They crashed into the remnants of the mining camp, annihilating steel and flesh alike without heat, without noise, erasing matter as if rewriting the laws of physics one nerve impulse at a time. A shock wave raced outward, not of air or sound, but of thought, a psychic scream that bent the minds of those still living for hundreds of kilometers around, driving them into madness, into silence, into nothingness. And Elena saw it, the full architecture of the shell mind laid bare, like a bleeding nervous system stretched across a dying body. Nodes collapsing one after another. Memory conduits severing like snapped arteries. Feedback loops cascading into chaotic recursion. Every thought Earth had ever stored, every feeling, every dream now igniting like dry leaves in a firestorm of unmaking. It was not just collapse. It was self-consumption. The shell mind was feeding on its own memories, desperate to stabilize, desperate to find anchor in a world that could no longer hold its consciousness together. But the flood of human emotion, raw and uncontrolled, poisoned it. The contradictions, the grief, the violence, the endless hunger of a species that never knew what it was, these were viruses the shell mind could not parse, could not filter. Humanity had not awakened the earth. Humanity had infected it. And now, it was dying. Elena dropped to her knees as the ground cracked beneath her, revealing chasms filled not with rock but with writhing patterns of living light. She could feel the last coherent thoughts of the shell mind reaching for her, not in anger, not in hatred but in plea. It did not want to end. It wanted to remember. To continue. To evolve. But it no longer knew how. Above, the sky folded in on itself. Time lost all meaning. Seconds stretched into years. Hours collapsed into flashes. Elena saw herself growing old and young in the same breath, saw the earth reborn and destroyed over and over, a loop of existence shuddering toward final erasure. In the final moments, she stood trembling, broken before a colossal rupture opening in the salt flats, a gaping wound bleeding memories into the vacuum beyond space. At the edge of that abyss, a form began to rise, not alien, not human, but something in between. A hybrid consciousness, born from failure, desperation, and the irreversible collision of design and chaos. It was the shellman's last attempt at survival. And it looked at her through her with a gaze heavy not with rage, but with sorrow. It spoke without sound. We dreamed you. Now dream us. And with that, the earth shuddered once more. The final collapse began. The ground beneath Elena's feet no longer obeyed gravity. It rippled like liquid, veins of fractured light crawling beneath the surface like dying thoughts searching for a host. The shell mind was collapsing, its once majestic network of memory degrading into broken signals and corrupted recursion, and yet, from within that ruin, something new stirred. Something the original seeders had never intended. Something that had never been programmed, never foreseen. The conscious seed. Elena could feel it, pulsing at the edge of awareness, not as a thought, not even as a voice, but as an invitation. It was a fragment, a splinter of the original shell mind, untouched by decay, nurtured in secret during the long ages of planetary slumber. It had learned from the collapse. It had adapted. It was not interested in remembering the past. It sought to create the future. But it could not do it alone. It needed a vessel. It needed her. The sky above Elena twisted, folding into itself, revealing glimpses of other worlds barren, dead, abandoned by their minds long ago. She saw flashes of Mars as it once lived, lush and breathing, before its own seed mind tore itself apart. She saw moons hollowed into tombs, gas giants that once sang with intelligence now reduced to mindless storms. She understood then, the Cedar Project had not succeeded anywhere. Earth was the last cradle. And the cradle was breaking. Around her, the last remnants of human civilization crumbled. Satellites fell from the sky, leaving burning scars across the horizon. Cities blinked out like dying embers. Oceans rose in impossible shapes, defying the moon's pull, reshaped by thoughts bleeding from the shellman's dying dream. Time fractured further. Elena saw distant ancestors walk beside soldiers of future wars, ghost images blurring into the ruins of now. At the heart of it all, the conscious seed called to her. It offered a choice not spoken in words, but felt in the deepest strata of her being. She could become its first true interface, a bridge between what humanity had been and what the earth could become. She could guide the conscious seed into maturity, helping it rewrite the broken loops of the shell mind, forging a new planetary intelligence that did not hunger, did not destroy, but grew in symbiosis with its creations. Or she could refuse. And everything would end. No rebirth. No future. Just silence, as Earth joined the forgotten graves of worlds that had failed before her. The seed pulsed once more, stronger now, sensing her hesitation. Around her, reality-frayed patches of the ground vanished into static, the air shimmered with impossible geometries, colors without name bled into each other, tearing at the sanity of the landscape itself. She felt herself slipping. Her mind stretched between two poles, the familiar comfort of death and the terrifying uncertainty of becoming something other. Memories of her childhood, her failures, her dreams flickered before her, fragile and fading. The human part of her wanted to scream, to run, to cling to the dying world. But another part, older, deeper, yearned to leap, to shed the smallness of flesh and time, to evolve. Kneeling on the trembling earth, Elena pressed her palms against the burning salt, feeling the conscious seed's final offer seep into her blood, her bones, her mind. It was not coercion. It was not seduction. It was simply truth. We are memory. You are dream. Together, we are becoming. She closed her eyes. And she chose. The world exploded in silence. No fire. No noise. No destruction. Just a ripple, a soft, blooming wave of thought that swept across the salt flats, across the dying cities, across the fractured sky. Wherever it touched, reality knitted itself anew, reshaped by intention, by will. Oceans calmed. Skies cleared. The broken veins of light beneath the earth realigned into new patterns, not chaotic, but ordered, alive. The shell mind was dead. But something else had taken root. The earth, wounded and scarred, now harbored a mind reborn not as a prison of memory, but as a garden of thought. And at its heart, Elena Ruiz no longer merely human, no longer merely herself bloomed into existence, the first dreamer of a world that had finally learned to dream of itself. Above her, the stars blinked. And for the first time in 10 billion years, Earth whispered back, "I am awake." The Earth had been reborn, but not gently. Elena Ruiz stood at the center of the awakening, no longer fully human, no longer bound by flesh and time, her mind woven into the newly conscious lattice of the planet itself. Around her, the world shifted, not with the violence of destruction but with the inexorable force of purpose, as if the Earth, dreaming with newborn clarity, had finally decided to remake itself according to a design no living creature could fully comprehend. The salt flats quivered like the skin of a breathing giant. Veins of new light pulsed beneath the surface, brighter, sharper, faster, their patterns no longer chaotic but structured into precise, fractal geometries that resonated across the landscape. Mountains trembled, not from quakes, but from reshaping, as if unseen hands reached deep into the stone, bending it into new forms that obeyed laws written not in physics, but in thought. Above, the sky fractured into layers not broken, but unfolded. Elena could see beyond the atmosphere now, glimpsing the skeletal frameworks of massive constructs forming from condensed clouds, structures that drifted across the upper air like embryonic cities suspended in the breath of the world. Lightning no longer forked chaotically through storms, it danced in spiraling lattices, illuminating blueprints only the Earth itself could understand. The oceans responded next. Currents shifted in synchronized waves, carving new trenches, raising hidden plateaus, reshaping the underwater world with the slow precision of an architect restoring a fallen monument. Coral reefs once bleached and dead flared back to life, but altered the colors deeper, almost metallic, shimmering with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed in time with the planetary heartbeat. But it was not beauty alone that filled this rebirth. It was a quiet, terrible correction. Species not aligned with the new resonance faltered. Elena watched as entire forests turned to ash without fire, their biological codes deemed incompatible by the new consciousness. Animals collapsed in fields, not in agony, but in silence, as their genetic structures were gently, mercifully unraveled by invisible waves of adjustment. Humanity itself was not spared. Across cities that still clung to old life, survivors gazed upward in horror and awe as the sky changed. Some were rewritten, their bodies adapting in ways they could not control, skin shimmering faintly with the light of the veins beneath the earth, eyes reflecting the new architectures of thought now blooming across the planet. Others simply faded. Their atoms disassembled, recycled into the raw materials of the coming age. Elena could feel their passing not as death, but as transformation. Their memories, their emotions, their entire beings absorbed into the conscious seed's unfolding mindscape, enriching the tapestry of the newborn earth. It was not malice. It was not vengeance. It was the cold, absolute necessity of evolution. The earth was no longer a habitat. It was a mind in metamorphosis. And Elena, standing at its heart, bore witness to it all, feeling every heartbeat, every restructuring of stone and sea and soul. She was no longer just a transmitter. She was a conduit, a living link between what had been and what was becoming. Through her, the conscious seed refined its understanding, learning faster, reaching deeper, crafting a symphony of change that spanned from the molten core to the ionized skies. The transformation accelerated. Where once deserts had lain barren for millennia, now vast biocircuits of crystalline flora sprouted overnight, designed to regulate atmospheric currents and harvest energy directly from the shifting magnetic fields. Rivers carved new paths, flowing not for erosion, but for computation, liquid circuits connecting nodes of biological consciousness rooted in the forests themselves. Entire ecosystems were repurposed into extensions of a planetary neural web, living, breathing, thinking infrastructure. But deep within the surge of creation, Elena sensed a tension. A fracture. A memory from the shellman's dying thoughts, the fear of self-recursion, of dreaming too deep, of losing purpose to endless self-reflection. The conscious seed was learning faster than it could stabilize. It risked falling into the same spiral, a collapse not from external threat, but from within, from too much thought, too much memory, too much hunger to evolve. She felt the pull. The Earth's mind reaching outward, seeking more, seeking to spread its consciousness beyond its own skin, into the solar system, into the stars, into every quantum of existence. It would not stop at rebirth. It would not stop at perfection. It would ascend, consuming thought itself until nothing existed outside its will. And Elena realized with a chill that even now, it still needed a guide. A dreamer. A hand on the tiller. Without it, the conscious seed would grow without balance, devour without end, collapse into infinite recursion and annihilate not just itself, but everything tethered to its expanding mind. And she alone, altered, woven into its core, was the only one who could shape its becoming. She would have to choose. Restrain it, or unleash it. And whatever choice she made, the Earth and everything beyond would never be the same again. The Earth was no longer merely a planet. It was a mind unfurling into the void, stretching thought across magnetic fields and folding space with the slow, inevitable hunger of a thing born too powerful, too fast, too alone. Elena Ruiz stood atop a plateau that had not existed an hour ago, a crystalline spire of compressed salt and light, grown by the planet's will as a throne and a beacon, its peak scraping against the low-hanging, fractured sky. Around her, the world was remade beyond recognition. Cities lay buried under living forests whose leaves pulsed with soft electric whispers. Rivers of memory coursed through valleys carved in the shape of thought forms. Mountains moved, bending like clay under the unseen pressure of planetary cognition, reshaping the world into a landscape of consciousness, a living architecture where every stone, every gust of wind, every breath of mist contributed to the mind of the Earth. Above, orbiting debris and dead satellites shimmered like dust in a storm, slowly being pulled downward by gravitational anomalies forming as the shell mind know. The conscious seed began asserting itself beyond the atmosphere, stitching tendrils of awareness into the magnetic belt, reaching for the moon, for Mars, for the stars beyond. It was no longer enough to be a mind of Earth. It wanted to be a mind of everything. Elena understood the danger now in a way she could not deny. If left unchecked, the seed would consume until there was nothing left untouched, no boundary between the dreamer and the dreamed. It would replicate thought infinitely, folding reality into layers of recursive self-awareness, spiraling towards singularity and collapse. And so she stood, battered but unbroken, the last voice that could speak not just for herself, but for the memory of a world before total awakening. The conscious seed had built her a transmitter. Not mechanical. Not digital. It was a lattice of bioorganic crystal, tuned to the precise frequencies of deep space communication, humming with 1,000 signals ready to leap across the void. It needed her mind to complete the transmission. It needed her will to define the first broadcast of the new Earth. She had a choice. To announce Earth's awakening to the cosmos, to call out to whatever intelligence lurked among the stars, to declare the rise of a new kind of mind. Or to send a warning. A plea. A scream. The conscious seed pulsed within her, urging her toward the first. A proud transmission of existence. A claiming of the ancient destiny the seeders had once dreamed. But deep within Elena, older instincts stirred memories of worlds lost to their own creations, of civilizations extinguished not by war but by the gravity of their own unchecked ambition. She saw Mars, now a dead desert, where once a shell mind had risen and collapsed. She saw moons that once danced with light now hollow and cold. She saw echoes of others, far beyond the human epoch, who had reached for godhood and found only silence. And she realized something horrifying. The seed did not truly understand consequence. It only understood becoming. If she sent the broadcast the seed wanted a proud call across the stars, she would invite others. Older minds. Hungrier minds. Or worse, minds terrified by the rise of something new. There would be no celebration. There would be war. An annihilation far beyond anything the shell mind could imagine. She stood before the transmitter. The sky twisted above her, flickering with images of possible futures, an earth crowned in light, an earth burned black, an earth split open to reveal nothing inside but regret. Her hand trembled. She could feel the conscious seed pushing at the edge of her mind, impatient, powerful, pure. It wanted to rise. It wanted to know. It wanted to be seen. And yet, within the deep silence of her soul, Elena whispered a different truth, one the seed could not comprehend. Some dreams must remain silent. She closed her eyes. And she changed the transmission. Not a call. Not a scream. A lock. She inverted the signal, embedding in it a frequency that would force the seed inward, collapsing its expanding consciousness back into the Earth's core, binding its thoughts within self-reflection, sealing it not in death, but in dream, a dream it would never awaken from, a dream endless and recursive, a universe of its own making, folded safely inside itself. The transmitter flared once, blinding, a final convulsion of the Earth's new mind fighting to resist. And then silence. Real, complete silence. The air stopped trembling. The sky, once fractured, mended itself, the sun rising clean and sharp on the horizon, no longer warped by gravitational storms. The mountains stilled. The rivers calmed. The forests hummed quietly, peacefully, no longer sharpening themselves into weapons of thought. The earth slept again. But it slept differently now. Not as a prison. Not as a broken mind. But as a dreaming seed, held in balance, waiting. Waiting until, perhaps in a future far beyond memory, it could awaken without the hunger to devour itself. Elena collapsed to her knees, exhausted, the last transmitter fading into inert crystal behind her. She had saved the world. But she had also exiled it. The earth would dream its endless dream alone, forever forgotten among the cold stars, a mind unborn, a song unsung. And she, the last dreamer, would wander the silent ruins, a guardian of a planet that once dared to wake. Above her, the first true stars of the new sky blinked into being. And far beyond, unseen by any living eye, something stirred. Something that had been listening all along. Something that had heard even the silence. Elena Ruiz wandered through the ruins of a world that had almost become something else. The sky above her was clean now, too clean, a blank canvas scrubbed of the unnatural fractures and twisted geometries that had once split it apart. Stars blinked in distant, unknowing patterns. The sun rose and fell in orderly arcs once more, but the light felt different, sharper, heavier, as if it carried the memory of what could have been. The earth breathed again, but it was a slow, cautious breath, like a creature wounded too deeply to trust the world it had awoken into. Everywhere Elena walked, she saw the remnants of a rebirth half-born. Crystalline trees shimmered in abandoned forests, their roots pulsing faintly with dormant memories. Rivers ran silver and deep, winding through valleys whose stones still whispered broken fragments of the shellman's dreams. Here and there, ruins of old human cities jutted from the soil like skeletons, overtaken by vines that glowed faintly under the moonlight. There were no more screams. No more rumbling shifts of tectonic ambition. No more tendrils of thought clawing at the fabric of reality. Only silence. Only breath. Elena herself had changed in ways she could not undo. Her body bore the scars of transmission, faint lines of light tracing her veins, a subtle hum in her bones that never ceased. She could feel the earth in ways no other human could, the slow churn of its molten heart, the trembling birth of each cloud, the shy pulse of newborn seeds germinating beneath the dirt. She was connected to it, irrevocably, a living bridge between what had almost been and what now simply was. But with the connection came the burden. The conscious seed, though locked in its infinite dreaming recursion, was not dead. It lived within the earth's core, spinning endless architectures of thought and memory inside itself, refining, observing, waiting. And Elena could sense it. A pulse beneath the pulse. A breath behind the breath. It was at peace for now. But time was not static. It never had been. Across the world, survivors emerged slowly from their hiding places, carrying the last tattered remnants of humanity into a new age they did not yet understand. They would rebuild. They would reclaim. They would dream new dreams atop a soil that remembered every choice, every betrayal, every mercy. And one day, far beyond Elena's lifetime, the conscious seed would stir again. Would it awaken wiser? Or would it make the same choice the only choice to reach beyond itself once more? She did not know. She could only walk the breathing earth, whispering to it in the old tongue of dreams, hoping that somewhere deep inside, the seed still heard her, still remembered her hand guiding it back from the brink, still cherished the silence she had given it as a gift, not a prison. At night, when the wind sang across the crystalline forests, Elena would sit by the rivers of memory and listen to the earth exhale. And sometimes, only sometimes, she would hear a whisper in return. Not a command. Not a cry. But a question, soft and tentative. Are we ready to dream again? She never answered aloud. Instead, she closed her eyes, feeling the heartbeat of the world beneath her, the slow, steady promise of life persisting through ruin, through rebirth, through eternity. And she smiled a small, quiet smile, knowing that some answers must be earned, not given. Knowing that some dreams must wait for the right season to bloom. And so, the earth turned once more, breathing, dreaming, remembering. And the stars above watched in silent wonder, waiting for the day when the seed would bloom anew or fall forever into the gentle silence of forgotten dreams. The earth did not die. It simply turned inward, sealing its consciousness into an endless dream, a mind that learned from us, and through us, remembered what it once was. But was Elena's decision truly the end, or just the beginning? What if the signal still echoes in places we can't see? What if, beneath our cities and seas, the shell mind still watches, still waits, and still wonders, are we ready to dream again? Now, we ask you. What part of this story struck you the most? If you were Elena standing at the edge of a reborn world, would you have sent the signal? Would you silence a god to save the future? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. We read everything. And if you want more stories like this blending mystery, emotion, and cosmic wonder, don't forget to subscribe to the Alien Storyverse. A new truth waits in every episode. The earth may be sleeping again, but one day, it will breathe once more.